Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Kirk Ulmer, your friendly Train the Trainer, and I want to thank you guys for your patience and for tuning into this webinar. And this is a listen-only webinar, and what I'm going to do is take questions at the end. There's a lot of content here, and probably a lot of your questions can be answered towards the end of the presentation if they're not. Okay, so you'll have the opportunity to ask your questions via the chat feature at the end of the presentation. Okay. On this splash screen here, I have just a reminder to where you can access some of the key training materials for the new campus voucher transaction. And I'll be talking more about the training aspects and how we're going to deal with that at the end of this presentation. Okay, so what we're going to cover today, quick agenda, is just very quickly touch on a little difference in the campus vendor transaction that's maybe a little different from those of you that attended Train the Trainer early on. We're going to take a look at the key differences between the old and new campus voucher. I know you guys are eager to see that and figure out how we're going to train that. And then I'm going to take an in-depth look at actual demonstration in the system of the new campus voucher. And then we're going to talk about some of the training considerations. When is the new transaction going to be available in the training environment? And then also about the training materials and how we're going to deal with that. So, and then at the end we'll do questions and answers that you could submit via the chat function. Okay. So let me just kick it off real quick with just a quick note on the campus vendor change. So I won't go in and demonstrate this. Some of you have probably already seen this. It's already in the training environment, but there's a nice feature that people have been asking for. When you're requesting a change to an existing vendor and you don't know the tax identification number for, say, an independent contractor or a conventional vendor, or you don't know the PID of the employee vendor, there's a lookup feature that's going to be available within the transaction. So essentially you can use the lookup feature, search via the person's name, and then you can use that function to be able to enter in the TIN or the PID ID of the user. Okay. Okay, so now let's move forward and let's talk about what you're all raring and ready to see, is the changes to the campus voucher transaction. Okay, so how I'm going to do this is I'm going to touch on some of the high-level differences between the old and the new. Then I'm going to demonstrate the new, and in the system I'll demonstrate some of the high-level differences and walk through the transaction in the actual system. Right now it's just in the SPT system. We don't have it in the training environment. And so after I walk through a demo, I'm going to go through just some quick review slides that you can actually use if you've already taught users using the old version. You can use some of the slides to help change over, maybe with a quick session, but we'll talk a little bit about that after. So let's concentrate on the new campus voucher transaction. So just quickly, the old version, you guys remember, there was this functionality with this voucher build. It was a little bit complex. The old version had that concept where it evolved from a campus voucher into a regular voucher, and that was sort of the caterpillar to the butterfly concept. The old version had limited ability, actually no ability, to change the actual campus voucher once it's into the approval process. It required a start over. There was multiple screens and tabs to navigate. And then you remember we had to use a transaction, the voucher inquiry, in order to be able to see what was actually inside a voucher. We didn't have access to the core transaction. But the new version remedies a lot of those issues with the old version. So the new version, there's none of that sort of that voucher build steps involved. The new version, it's going to be very simplified. From one transaction, you'll be able to create, change, and view from one single transaction. And then in addition, the new version allows for changes during the workflow approval process, either by originators or approvers. And depending upon the nature of the change, it may cause it to resubmit back to the beginning of workflow, and we'll take a little tour of that when I get into the system demonstration that I'm going to do shortly. Okay, and I think you'll like the new version. It's a single screen, fewer tabs, very well organized, and basically one spot to be able to see all the information that you need with regards to a particular voucher. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at the new campus voucher process. Essentially, we have the same requirements in terms of why a new campus voucher would be used. You use it for reimbursements, independent contractors, cash advances, and petty cash replenishment. And so within that campus voucher transaction, we have similar functions that we did before. It's basically entering the key information that is needed in order to get somebody or some company paid. Okay? So you have all your vendor information like before. And then in place we have checks, the combo edit for valid card field combinations and a budget check. And along the way, the user has the opportunity or the choice to take that voucher all the way from beginning to end and get it into workflow after it's been combo edited and budget checked, or there's some system processes that are involved that will actually do some of that work for you in terms of getting it into the approval workflow, and we'll take a look at that. And then once it makes it into the approval workflow, it goes to the various approvers. And then once it's approved and makes it through disbursement services, then it's ready to pay. So the main difference between this new process and the old process, you don't have that intermediate step of switching from the campus voucher to the regular entry voucher. Okay. And then importantly, I think you guys will like, during the approval process, or actually any time during the process, that voucher can be changed. And depending upon the nature of the change, it might resubmit it into workflow or continue on if it's in the middle of workflow, if it's not a key accounting change. Like, for example, maybe attaching a document. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at the new campus voucher in the system. This transaction is not in the training environment yet, so I'm going to be going into the SPT system in order to demonstrate this for you here today. Okay, and so it's going to be accessed via the same menu path that we used previously. And so I'm going to Finance menu, Accounts Payable, Vouchers, Add Update, and Campus Voucher Entry. Okay, and one of the key features you'll like, throughout the process, whatever campus voucher is created, it will be accessed through this one transaction. So you can look for existing values or you can add a new value. For the sake of time, I went and got a campus voucher started, and so I'm going to look for one that I created. So I'm going to search because I put in a custom invoice number. Okay, and so this is I'm accessing a voucher that I had already created. Okay, and if you're actually adding or creating for the first time, it's a similar concept that we had before. You can put key values on the initial add screen, and then they will default into the primary screens. Okay, And so if we take a look at the high-level way this new campus voucher is organized, it has some similarities to the old one. At the top you have header information, and all this information is contained within one tab. It's the invoice information tab. Okay? And so you have the invoice number, invoice date, vendor IDs, the key remit to locations. It's all the same process as we had before. And then in addition, you'll notice a difference. This is the difference between the old version and the new. There's actually the ability to enter in miscellaneous fees as well as freight fees in the system. And what happens if you actually enter in these fees using these fields, it will equally or proportionally allocate those fees across any distribution lines that you have entered in on the campus voucher. And that information is contained within the new training manual that is available to you. So I'm going to touch on a lot of the things very quickly here, and I definitely recommend that you refer to the new manual because basically everything that I'm mentioning is going to be in there. Okay. We have a function that lets you calculate, and so it's similar to what we had before. You basically have a calculations of the total amount of the invoice that you entered, and then it calculates the difference between whatever you've entered in on the invoice lines and then any miscellaneous and freight charges that you have in there. So when you hit calculate, it shows the difference below. And of course, to move forward and to process this voucher, it has to be a difference of 0. Okay. So moving down, we took a look at the header information. Moving down, we can see the invoice line, the line item, and the distribution lines for that line item contained on that same screen. It's nice. It's just one screen. You don't have to drill into the line item to get to the distribution lines. Okay? And one thing that you should be aware of when you're doing this and you actually have more than one line item, just be aware that you can either scroll between the different line items. I have 2 line items. I can go back and forth. That's the second line item. Or you can stack them. If you do view all, you can see line item 1 and its distribution line, and then you can see line item 2 and its distribution line. Okay? And so when entering in the invoice lines, there's functionality available where you can use the speed charts if you're paying against an Office of Sponsored Research, an OSR invoice, for example. And what that does is you can look up a project number and pick the project number, and it will put in the chart fields appropriate for that particular project for you. At this time, speed charts are only used for those OSR projects. Okay. And you'll notice the rest of the functionality is similar to what we had before. It's essentially putting in the price, the quantity ordered, the unit of measure, the description of what the line item is, and then the category. And remember that the category defaults the account value that is tied to that particular category code. Now, one thing that I want to point out that's a sort of a difference and something that wasn't highlighted in depth in the Train the Trainer class is this UNC item ID. So they're going to be loading in some standard items from vendors, and when you actually go and do the lookup, you can select different item IDs and it will default in the description. Additionally, and this is in all the instructions that I've rewritten up for you, you can use this field to enter in a vendor ID to keep track of it. So if a vendor has a particular material ID and you want to have it tied to this particular voucher, you can enter that in here as well. Or you can just leave it blank and manually enter in the description. So for this line item, I've done my chart field accounting entries. Everything looks great. And the reason I know everything looks great is the fact that there's no warning message contained here on the line. If I look at my second item that I had created, there's actually a warning message here showing that there's something wrong with my entries, okay? And I think that's a very handy feature, and that's new to this particular design. And so if you have errors within that line, and you can see here, you guys are experts on chart fields, you can see that I've forgotten the source. You can go to one common place to see where all the errors exist on the voucher, and you can do that from the error summary. Okay, so if I look at the error summary, what that's going to show me is any chart field combination errors that I have, and I can use that for information and helping resolve any errors that I might have. Okay, and so I can go back to the invoice information tab, and again remind you that I do have an error with my particular voucher. And while I have that error, I just want to show you some other statuses in some of these other tabs that information is available. If I go to the summary tab, okay, it gives me a lot of key statuses. And what it's telling me, if I look at the budget status, it means it's not checked. We still have the same sequence that we need on the voucher moving forward. The sequence being, it has to be valid. All the the combo edits are valid. Then it can be budget checked. Then it can be submitted into the approval process. So this one's early on. If the budget status is not checked, I haven't checked this voucher yet. Okay. So let's go ahead and fix this guy. If I go back to the invoice information tab, and I put in a source that works, 4101, okay, and like before, when I hit save, it will check my entries and see if it's a valid combination. Let's keep an eye on this warning message. Let's hope it disappears. You guys ready? Save. Okay, and one thing that I want to point out, when using this new version of the transaction, a lot of the warning messages are very useful and informative. This one you're familiar with. Make sure you attach any appropriate documentation. I actually already did. That's going to show up regardless every time you save. So I hit OK. And we're keeping an eye on that last line. And it looks like my warning message in line 2 went away. Okay, that's great. That's good news. And so if I looked at the error summary tab, what are we going to see? We're going to see the voucher does not have any errors. Great. So we made it this far. So at this point, the person entering in the voucher could actually walk away, and the voucher via batch processes could be moved forward. There's actually a couple batch processes that run in the background throughout the day, and one of them is it will grab any campus voucher that's in a valid error-free status and then run a budget check on it. And then there's another process that runs that will go ahead and grab all the campus vouchers that have a valid budget check, and then those they'll actually submit into approval. But I think most users will want to marshal their voucher to the end just to make sure everything is working and making it to the end, and that's what we're going to do here. Okay. So if I go back to my invoice information tab, I look at some of the statuses. Again, it hasn't been budget checked yet, so let's go ahead and budget check it. And the budget check is run from right here. So if I do budget check and then I click run, the system's going to run the budget check. Okay. There's this pop-up that appears. You're going to want to click yes. Just do the budget check in the foreground. If you click no, it basically shuts the transaction down and puts it into display mode, and the recommended way to do it is yes, just do it in the foreground. Okay. So right now the system is actually going in budget checking. And remember, when it's budget checking, it's just making sure that all the distribution chart field lines that you entered in, that there's a valid budget that can go to. So you notice that it finished processing, and you say, oh, what happened? Well, there wasn't any errors, so it didn't give me a pop-up message, but I can always verify whether or not that budget check was successful, and I can do that by going back to that Summary tab. And on the Summary tab, you can see that the budget status is valid, okay? And one thing that you'll notice that during this stage of the process, we've budget checked and it's valid, and it hasn't actually gone into the workflow process yet. There's a batch system that will actually push this into workflow in the background if that budget status is valid, or we can push it into the approval process ourselves. And so right now, this link here that's available, it's preview approval. And when it says preview approval, that means what is going to be the approval chain once it gets submitted in. And we'll see once it's submitted into approval, this link will actually change to approval history. Okay? So let's go ahead and submit this into workflow, and I can do that from the Invoice Information tab. So once that budget check status is valid, this button here is available, so I can submit it into the approval process. So I'm going to go ahead and click on that. Okay, I can put in notes to the approver, all the different approval levels. I can hit OK, and it gives me my warning. I attach my documentation. Thank you for giving me the heads up. Okay, so now it pops up. Once it's in the workflow approval, there's a tab available called Approval Summary, or I could get to that approval via that Summary tab link as well. Okay, and so from here, in this one spot, you don't have to go to the voucher inquiry. You can see who are the approvers that this is going to go to. So I can see a list of the approvers, and that's based upon the chart fields that I entered in, departmental approvers, and then it kicks to OSR if it's relevant, and then, of course, to disbursement services. So I can see at any point in time what that approval history is. So let's take a look back at that Summary tab. If I look at the Summary tab, we can see here now it says Approval History, and before it said Pending Approval. So if it says Approval History, you know that it's in actual workflow. And then also if this Approval Summary tab shows up, that means that's went ahead and gone into workflow. And when I say gone into workflow, what does that mean? It means that those people that we saw on the workflow list, it's going to show up in their work list, and they'll be able to process, essentially approving or denying. Okay? And one thing that I want to point out with this new design is once it's in workflow approval, if changes are made either by the originator or by an approver, depending upon the nature of the change, it might trigger it to go back out of the workflow process. So I'll just show that to you really quick. So if I sent it to a different department and I make a change, and I'm going to send it to the biology department. So once I hit save, it's going to look at that, and the system is going to give me some information. So it's basically giving me information on what it's going to do with this particular change that I've made. And it gives me the option. Selecting yes will automatically resubmit the voucher for approval. No will allow me to resubmit it later. And if I hit cancel, it cancels that change that I made. So anytime you make a change, it will let you know if, and give you some choices on what you need to do. Okay. So I'm just going to hit cancel. Okay. The save of this voucher has been canceled. Okay. So that gives you a high-level overview of some of the key changes. And I know you guys probably have some questions right now, but let's save them to the end, and then maybe we can circle back about any of some of the features that I showed you here with the new campus voucher. So as a review, some of the key changes and some of the key features of the new transaction. And these particular slides are going to be available to you, and they'll be useful for you if you've already trained your people on the old version of the campus voucher, and you want to give them a highlight of some of the new changes. In some cases, I think the changes are not super major. In fact, this new transaction is easier to use, and in conjunction with the great training materials that they're going to have available and maybe a presentation with some of these key highlights, they'll be able to move forward and be successful when we go live with this transaction. So some of the key highlights that I had already touched on. One transaction, you can create, change, and display from one place. And on one page, you have the header items, the distribution lines, on one page. That's handy, okay? And once you save the record, you can access all the key information with the voucher from the different tabs. And along the way, if there is a error that the system recognizes, it will give a visible warning message allowing you to go and remedy or fix any changes. And there's the simplified budget check. So it's simply selecting an action and then running it. And then on the summary tab, you have a lot of nice access to the key statuses and information, like the budget status is going to be important. It can't go into workflow, it can't be processed, it can't be paid until it passes that budget check. Okay, so from this one page, we can see if the budget status is valid. We can see if there's exceptions. If there are exceptions, there's a link on there that will give you more information on what the exceptions are. Or it will say budget status not checked. You can view the approval history path and the potential path. And then you can view all the various statuses associated with the voucher on the summary page. One thing that I want to point out is this particular new version of the campus voucher, the main difference is all of these vouchers are going to be an origin of CMP. And so if you're using the voucher inquiry and you want to just sort down to only campus vouchers, you can do it by voucher origin down to CMP. Okay, and then as we saw in the error summary tab, there's a place, if there's errors, it will show what those errors are, and then it also gives a confirmation that, hey, there's no errors. Okay, and then also you have visibility into payment information from this one transaction. Okay, so you can see and verify what the payment address is, when it's scheduled to be paid, what the payment method is that's coming through for this particular voucher and vendor. And you can find even more payment-related information via the Related Documents tab. Okay, so you can see what was actually paid, how it was paid, and then check numbers if relevant. So you can, if you know the voucher ID or you search for it, you can find the relevant information just by accessing this transaction. Okay. So that was a sort of a quick run through that transaction. So before we get to your questions, we'll try and answer some of them. So what's the plan of attack in terms of how we're going to train this and how we're going to transition to training for that new campus voucher? So let's first talk about the training environment. Okay. So right now, plan for a week from today, we are going to put the new campus voucher transaction into the training environment in the afternoon. Okay. If perchance you have training scheduled for Friday afternoon, let us know because that's actually going to be a time when you'll log into the system and the old one won't be there and it will be the new one. Okay, and so involved with that is a lot of testing that we're going to have to do on the project side. We have to make sure that all your generic user IDs work properly, make sure the transaction went through well, and so we're going to have to do a lot of testing. And that testing is going to occur, hopefully we'll conclude it that Friday afternoon, but it could happen through the weekend. And so likely that weekend, so on Saturday, the September 6th, you'll actually have the ability to go and test and practice on the new campus voucher transaction. Okay, and so if you happen to run into any issues at any time, you can email me, and there's my email address, Kirk Ulmer, with issues or questions. Okay. And then the new transaction will be available for classroom use on Monday, September 8th. So if you have a class scheduled for Monday, September 8th, be aware and be ready for that new transaction. And that, unfortunately, it might mean you getting into the system a little bit ahead of time, maybe on Sunday, and double checking what you know, some of the new functionality, being able to get some hands-on practice. Okay, so now what are we going to do about training materials for cutover? Okay, I have soft copies of everything out into the SharePoint site. If you go into ccinfo.unc and you go to the Tips and Trainer section and you click on the SharePoint link, you can navigate to a folder that's called New Campus Vouchers, and you're going to have all the soft copies of the materials, including the revised Voucher Student Guide, which I highly recommend that you read through just to understand all the new functionality and how everything works. There's a revised presentation, revised exercises, and revised instructor guide. Okay, and then also there we have basically this presentation that I'm showing you here. Some of the key campus voucher changes, and it's a PowerPoint. And you can use this PowerPoint and customize it however you like. If you need to do sort of a what's changing session for your people that are actually need more information but have already been trained on the old version of the campus voucher. And so generally speaking, what we're recommending is if people got trained on the old campus voucher, we don't think that they're going to have to go to a whole brand new session. I think some of the key skills that they learned entering in chart fields, understanding combo edit errors, understanding budget checks, I think those core skills that they learned in those classes, if you've already taught them, are going to be enough, but they'll just need a little bit of help moving forward. And as a project team, we're actually going to create some more user-facing information similar to this presentation that I went through, some of the key changes that will be made available to the end users. Okay, so the last document is basically the information contained in these last couple slides. There's just a one document for training information for the new campus voucher cutover. Okay, and now here's the tough part for some of you that have training scheduled for next week and the following week. Basically, we're stopping any printing of the old version, and we're moving towards the new version. Okay, and so you need to communicate with, if you've already put in an order for the student guide and you haven't gotten it yet, communicate with Stephanie Ellis, and you can coordinate with her in terms of what you're going to get, and it will basically be the new student guide. And yeah, and again, that the new student guide is also available via the SharePoint site via soft copy. Okay, so we do request that those of you who already trained people on the old campus voucher, if you hold off on any requests for now on getting those people the newer version of the student guide, that way we can allow for all the people that haven't trained on it yet. In terms of the printing capacity, we can only, the print shop can only print so many, and we want to take care of those people that are actually doing their classes and have those books available to them first. Okay. All right, so I'm sure you guys have some questions, and you can type any questions that you have via the chat feature, and I'll try and answer them the best I can. Okay, so Lauren has a question about, it looks like they had created a bunch of vouchers that are going to be used for journal entry training. Those vouchers that have been created should be valid to use. You won't have to create new ones, Lauren. Okay, and so basically what this question applies to, and I'll try and clarify, and Lauren, you can object via chat if I'm incorrect in what I'm saying here, is in order to do some correcting journals for existing vouchers that I have posted, a lot of the trainers have had to do some extensive setup and creating vouchers in the system that their students can use in order to do correcting journal entries. And so her question was, do we have to do those over? And no. And the reason for that is without getting too technical, essentially it's, even though we keep calling these campus vouchers, it ends up being a regular entry voucher in the old way and then also in the new way as well. Okay, and somebody wanted to take a look at the way the print invoice function looks. Okay, so I guess essentially what the print invoice function does, and depending upon your needs, I'm guessing you might want to use that print invoice if you want to keep some sort of printed record of what you've entered. And that print invoice, essentially what it does is it gives some baseline information about what you've entered in the voucher itself. Okay, it's not tied to anything that you've attached to the voucher, and so it's just a way to create a PDF that provides information that is contained within the voucher. And right now it's a standard report that is in the system. Okay, so I guess if there's any specific needs or purpose of why you need this, maybe you can reach back to the project team and communicate that. So from here you can print it just like a regular PDF if you need to. Does anybody have any other questions? Okay. I knew if I would wait. Some people can type faster than others. Okay, so Amy has a question. Based upon the default category code selected with each line item, can we override that account? That account can be changed, but the guidance that we're given is in normal circumstances, that account should be left in place. The system doesn't stop you from actually changing that account. You should probably communicate with disbursement services, maybe touch base with Martha Pendergrass if you have a category code that does not default the correct correct account or it's a different account that you want to use. Okay. Okay, and the next question is when would you use miscellaneous fees? And that comes back to essentially how something is invoiced from a vendor. Like if you have a separate line item that's a completely separate line item on the invoice that say, hey, it's a rush fee or something like that, you can include that in that miscellaneous fee box. And remember, those freight fees and the miscellaneous fees, the reason that you use those fields is if you want those fees to be distributed evenly across all the distribution lines. If for any reason, and this is all in my documentation, if for any reason that you just wanted any freight fees or miscellaneous fees to just go to one chart string and not distribute across all the different lines, you just create a different line item on the invoice itself. Okay, I have another question. Okay, so one of the comments is, unless audit rules have changed, we have to keep printed records of financial transactions. It would be helpful if the print invoice feature contained the chart fields. Okay, I'm going to pass that comment on to the project team, and maybe we can get some guidance moving forward on that. Okay, any more questions here? And if you have any follow-up questions, just feel free to email me, kirk_ulmer@unc.edu. Okay, so Gladys has a good question here. If you enter in the UNC item ID, does it only populate the description? Do you still need to enter in the category? Let's take a look here real quick. That remains to be seen. I believe it's going to have the category code and the description. Right now, in this particular environment that I have, they haven't loaded in any of those UNC item IDs. But I believe it will be unit of measure, the description, and the category code. Good question, Gladys. Here's a good question, and it's a good point of clarification. So the question is, if we don't want the voucher to be picked up by batch processing throughout the day, should we save it in an invalid status? Yes. So here's how it works. If my voucher is valid and there's no errors in it and it's saved, a batch process will actually go and pick it up and do a budget check on it. And then if that budget check goes through completely, then there's another batch process that looks for all the vouchers that have a budget check status of valid, and then it will go ahead and submit it into workflow. So the automated processes will actually pick up valid vouchers and push them through all the way into approval. So if something is a work in progress, make sure that you leave it in a invalid status, and then the batch processes won't pick up that. And that can be used for those departments or groups where maybe someone entering in the actual voucher itself doesn't have the understanding or knowledge of the chart fields. They can get it completed as far as they can, save it with errors present, and then they can notify the person that actually enters in the chart fields. They can do that just via regular email. And then there's also a notify function as well. So essentially you can send an email through the system with a link to the transaction that they've created. Oh, and the question, and it's a good question, does the picking up of valid vouchers also count for the training environment? I don't know. I think we have the ability to turn on those processes or not. Currently, in the training environment, those background processes are not being run. That might be something that I have to think about. I think probably no, because what happens, and I've experienced this myself, is while you're working on it, if those background processes run, it might sort of change your voucher statuses while you're actually in it, and that sometimes can create a little bit of confusion. I think for the purposes of training, we're going to want to really focus in on that self-marshaling of the voucher through all the various processes manually. So making sure the combo edit errors are complete, running the budget check, making sure the budget status is valid, and then actually clicking that submit into approval button. Okay, the next question is when training in our groups, will the approval routing pertinent to our area show up? Some of the departments have been set up in the training environment, and actually, let me go into the training environment and see if I can answer that question for you, and I'll show you how it works. Okay, so essentially the way the workflow works is when it gets plugged into workflow, it looks at the chart fields, in particular the department, what's on the chart fields. And there'll be a few people in each department that have access to this transaction to be able to change, but I think most people can actually look at what the workflow configuration is. So we can see the departmental workflow config. Okay. And so based upon a particular department, you can actually see it go which department and where it will flow to. And so if I look at a particular department, I can see this one doesn't actually have it flowing to anybody. So I think some departments that haven't actually been maintained in the training environment in terms of who can receive the workflow. If you want to do that and look at it, you'd have to set up that departmental workflow via this transaction here. Okay. Great. Well, I appreciate your guys' patience throughout all of this. I know it's been a trying time for you guys getting up to speed on how the system works and doing your day jobs and having to figure out how you're going to train this stuff. And we know that the project very much appreciates your holding your heads up while you have your heads down and all this training. With that, I am going to conclude this session. Thank you guys, and feel free to contact me at any time. All right, thank you.